Welcome everyone to our LinkedIn Live panel session. We're going to be talking today about overcoming S4HANA project complexity. That includes talking about real-world fixes for things like misaligned workstreams. So I'm joining today from the US in Phoenix, but I'd love to hear where everybody else is joining from, because normally we have a great participation from around the globe. So note that there's a chat thing where you can pose questions to the panel, because I'd like to make this interactive. I've certainly got a number of questions I'd like to probe with them on this topic after my recent discussions with various SAP and IT leaders. So I'd like to introduce our panelists today as we start out. First, we have Sana Asher, who's the CEO of Masterclass for SAP, which sounds really exciting to love to maybe participate in that someday. And she's a ERP transformation specialist with deep expertise in S4 implementations. Secondly, I'm joined by Patrick Fiegel, who's the global head of strategic product partnerships at Tricentis, and also is a senior SAP program leader, having done projects all around the globe. And finally, Bernard Lang is the former CEO of MSG Global, was a global SI dedicated to SAP ERP, and he's currently on the supervisory board of several systems integrators, and is also a co-founder with myself here at LeapGreat. So I welcome the panel today and look forward to a healthy discussion, and thought we'd maybe get started off. And I thought maybe I'd sort of preface the discussion, more talking about, if you think about this first part about ERP projects, in prior sessions, we've discussed the ERP statistics. And I think there was a slide that I wanted to put up just to kind of frame a bit of the discussion here around it, because as we know, we've been doing ERP for 50 years now, and we still keep having the same challenges around that. And I don't know if they can put up the first slide just for that on the screen here. That but I'll just continue on if the audio or the video is not able to be put up. There we are. No, wrong one. But let's pass on that slide then. Basically, I think in our prior discussions, we talked about two major problems. One was this lack of visibility early on in SAP projects. And then the second was all around this misaligned work streams and the complexity. So I thought today was really the focus on that second part, because there were prior sessions where we focused on the first, although we're welcome to talk about that. But I thought we'd drill into the complexity, and I think with that, the kind of lack of control that I keep hearing from customers as they dive into these projects. But I thought I'd start out and just asking, why are these projects still so complex? So I don't know, maybe I'll say ladies first, and ask Sana to comment, like, why are they so complex still after 50 years?
Sure. Thank you, Ross, and welcome everyone. I think there is no one right answer, Ross. The reason they're complex is, as everything else, we're supposed to learn from our mistakes. But I guess in this situation, we really don't, right? We keep doing the same things over and over again, and we keep getting the same result. So one of the things that fundamentally needs to change is how we deliver these projects and how we look at them. And that is the only way the outcomes are going to change.
Excellent. What about from yourself, Barrett? You've been around this and seen hundreds of projects. What's your view of why they're so complex?
Yeah. Also, hello from my side. Hello from Munich. Nice to meet you. Yeah, I think all of us, we started our career in the 90s, I guess, or maybe even earlier, when SAP was still on the release 3.0 or earlier even. And if you compare the times, these were really nice projects where you had experts in the project who were able to talk to the client on a business level. They were also able to configure the system, and if there was a development required, they were also able to do that. Times have changed, and if you look at the consulting community today, it's more split. So you have analysts who is purely doing configuration. You have somebody who is talking to business, and then you have developers. And that's increasing the complexity. They have to talk to each other, and they have to be aligned. They have to have a common understanding. So in the 90s, this was one person maybe who was doing everything from client conversation to coding. And right now it's split among maybe 4 or 5 different people. And the second thing is, in the early days, of course, the whole tooling was not so complex. It was all about implementing an ERP system. ERP was still a very exclusive, a very strategic tool for the clients. It was a very strategic project in the heart of their business processes. And right now, the whole tooling has increased. There we have the SAP tool chain. We have the ERP split in various dimensions. There are multiple products. There are complex customer applications that need to be integrated. We have analytical capabilities. We have cloud capabilities, data capabilities, and the whole environment is far more complex. And I think that's the biggest change, that managing today's ERP world is far more complex than it was in the 90s.
Yeah. What about, I'm wondering your perspective, Patrick, around the control part of this, because you come from a background, especially at Tricentis, where it's much more about the quality, as part of that. But I also think that part of that starts from, sort of control. And how have you seen, over the years, the amount of control that feeds into this complexity? Are people more in control than they used to be, or less in control? What's your perspective?
They want to be in more control, but I think they are partly less aware of what that really means. It is a word. It's a world that has gotten indeed more challenging through the reasons that Bernhard mentioned. The architecture is a distributed architecture, and before I go on, hello from Vienna, by the way, and I'm very happy to be on this. But yeah, I think to begin with, ERP, is a mouthful. Enterprise, right? We're talking the entirety of the beast, right? And we're talking about the interplay of, financial, commercial, material, human interactions. So it's something that, by definition is complex. At the more difficult architecture that's more fragmented, that's more distributed. So you need to know how to keep these things together. And then, get back to Sana's point, people keep doing the same old routine, right? Indeed, I think that is largely, what happens at the behavioral level. Yeah. Now, the good news, I think, is there are opportunities, and we'll talk about this, to bring this together. There's more of a platform view from a tooling perspective. There's also understanding that tools don't do the job. You need to have guidance on the tools, So now we are talking about, working as a team, following sort of, one dance, rhythm, so to speak. So that's good. But the customer, right? And back to the core question here about control, I think is really looking at something almost, unfathomable, because it is on top of the fundamental scope of ERP. It is a world where we have, a ton of things to consider that we never had to think about, back in the day, right? So also go back to the 90s, and you did certain things, and you sort of tried out things as you went. Well, there are so many, regulatory and other types of considerations these days that are part of what you need to do, that you can very easily get lost, in busy work. Yeah. So I think the perspective for the size of what we're doing, unfortunately, is blurry. And this is, I think, where we need to kind of, team up, from the side of the people who've been around for a while, and, kind of see the different moving parts here, and then provide something that, happens to industrialize transformation. So I'll keep it at that.
No, that's very interesting around that. And I wanted to circle back maybe to Sana on what she talked about is, why we keep doing things the same way. And, why is that? And I throw up this as, I was thinking about this in the context of the complexity. This is something from SAP with Activate and all the different things. But I guess it's that fundamental question that's going through my mind is, why do we keep doing the same thing and getting the same results? Isn't that the definition they say of insanity? But
insanity,
are we just insane here, or and I don't know if this helps as a bit of a framework to help people see just how complex these things have become with all the different work streams and the stages of the process. I don't know if you want to expand on that a bit, Sana.
Sure, absolutely, Ross. So I think that there's a couple of reasons, right, that kind of feed into this. So number one, understanding strategically, right, what we are doing. Patrick, mentioned that he talked about the enterprise, and he talked about the entirety of what ERP projects are, right? I think from where we come in, it's not, sometimes there's not enough strategic backing to that project. There is more tactical. Hey, I have to get this done. Sometimes on the other side, people may be ready, but they are not ready to adapt to the new system. Sometimes it could just be that no one really understands the scope of what they want to do. So there's a bunch of different challenges, right? Strategic, operational, people. The software works, right? It is complex, but it works. It is amazing. It's been around for 50 years. We've all had amazing careers on SAP, so it absolutely works. What doesn't work is the way you adapt to it, right? And you adapt to the change as quickly as it's needed, and you need to make that pivot. So that's kind of what I feel, that if you're able to make the pivot and you're able to arm your teams with what is needed, I think we will not keep doing the same things in the same way. We'll definitely change.
Yeah, and I guess I'm wondering, I maybe turn it over to Bernd a bit. When I look at these different work streams here, and I'm wondering, as you look at this, which ones really impact complexity and control? Is there any sort of context as we look at these different work streams that you've found in your experience that where this sort of starts to become challenging and they really need to focus their attention on?
I mean, all around the processes is usually driving complexity. Do I set up my new system based on my old environment and my old processes, or do I set up my system based on everything that the new system brings? Yeah, S4, we have a big discussion around that with the blue field, green field, brown field. Everybody knows about these terms, right? And that's driving the complexity. Of course, it's far more complex to discuss somehow a new setup, a new process environment, compared to just I lift and shift everything what I have. Then I don't have to worry about processes. Then I have a pure technical task. But the biggest benefit, of course, you get if you really see what comes with the new system. How can I benefit from all the innovation that's coming with that, and how can I consume it? And I think that's a big driver of complexity. Also, I think you can't outsource responsibility. You have to take responsibility and take these decisions. So very often I saw that somehow decision making is delegated to the project team, and all of a sudden you say, okay, 3 or 4 project team members have to harmonize a business process, and they have to get their act together and then somehow come up with the target process. That doesn't work, right? It requires leadership. I think it requires decision making capabilities and strong guidance for a project team, and that's leadership, and that's also assuming responsibility for business decisions. And that's lacking very often. If you don't do that, then of course the effort is increasing. Then all of a sudden you have a broken process, you have confusion in the project, and that's usually what's driving the complexity and increasing the complexity. Very often you have to wonder, that's something what I saw several times. It's the same business model. Both implement SAP. One company fails, the other company is successful. So it can't be the software, right? The software is supporting the business model. So it must be around how the project is structured, what's the methodology, how the implementation is done. And I think there's a lot of complexity drivers, but also a lot of elements for success in that space.
Yeah, it was interesting as you were mentioning that, Barrett, because you brought up process a few times, and I was scanning through these work streams and I'm like, where is it? Process? Where is it? That's part of that. And if, correct me if I'm wrong, like there's a lot of stuff that you look at with data, and with SAP, isn't there something where data and process are very linked here? And so I'm wondering, why isn't process here? And does this go to maybe to Santa, to your point around, some of the strategic things that as we look at these projects, they're treated as like a technical exercise. I wonder if you have anybody has a viewpoint on those just observations that I have.
Process is kind of the backbone that holds together a bunch of these things here, right? And I think SAP is seen as a process-centric company, at the end of the day, because it indeed has such a broad spectrum to cover. And so it's always sort of end-to-end statements that people make when we ask them, what are you implementing? Source to pay, right? So we have a process in the game, and they will specifically be the, defining scope items to say what is happening in this fourth layer here called application design, right? Where you say, okay, strategic planning, what is it that we really want to do? So the answer would be, for instance, that, right? But you also have to look at the line before last, solution adoption, where we have the value discovery, right? So in the end, of course, you have the users, but you have the people who are sponsoring these initiatives, which, are very often rather rare users of the system, maybe for reporting and so forth. So those things are the ones that, should be attached to process. And the fact that the discussions here happen still today very often in isolation from one another, I think is the biggest driver of complexity. So the discovery phase ends up being a very nice phase, because I think both the software vendors and also the services vendors have gotten to understand how to position the benefit of what happens once you get to S4, once you incorporate the novel components of the business suite. But those conversations end up with expectations, and then they remain sort of disconnected from what happens in the phases where we are actually working on the system, which doesn't really happen until the realize phase. So we're still kind of in the sales phase throughout prepare and explore, but it comes realize, which at that point everything is signed and people are full of expectation. Many times it goes back to, okay, what are we really doing now, right? You're supposedly already working on very clear specifications. You have your analyses of how does the system support the expectations, during explore, the fit to standard, the famous one. But many times there's kind of a restart, in the blue part. And all of a sudden we realize, oh, we didn't think about this. We didn't think about the rest. So I think having these discussions without having a system to look at, in some type of isolation, that is probably the biggest driver of complexity.
That's very interesting. So it maybe comes back to what Santa was talking about, where the strategic part, they may talk about this less than they should, but to your point, adding to that, this lack of being able to see the system till very late, which was kind of the topic that we had on prior ones, kind of really helps them. It sets them up in a path that takes them a little more out of control. I wonder if there are other things around control about when they're doing this transformation that really complicate things. I don't know if is it their lack of skill internally? Is it what they're doing with how they're setting it up, or if they're trying to delegate it all, thinking a systems integrator will magically solve the problem there. I don't know if from your experience, either Bernd or Santa, if you have any perspective on that. I'm wondering strategically made for Santa, and then Bernd, from your experience of having run systems integrators, what you find to that example of those that do good and those that don't do so well.
Yeah, so I think a common understanding is very important for project success. So very often you have a situation at the beginning of a project where the customer doesn't understand SAP or the ERP system, and the consultant doesn't understand the customer. And these two parties sit together and they design how the system should look like, right? And then there is somehow uncertainty on the business side. They try to write everything down and request everything what they need because they don't know what they get. So they write up far too much. And the consultant somehow can't challenge the business user and is developing everything that he hears. I think you can solve that really by bringing reality early in the process, working with the system, showing the end users, the business users, what they get at the end. And I'm pretty sure they drop some of the requirements when they see the result early, when they can visualize, oh, this is how the system works. I don't need all these things. And that's why I believe we have a sort of a...
Is that all the customizations and things like that? When you say all these things that they don't need, what do you mean by that?
I think also from a business perspective, your business process. So in a moment where you don't know how the target system will look like or what the clean core process, for instance, looks like, then you request far too much, right? Then you want everything what you have today, but maybe you don't need everything what you have today because the target system is providing a different solution. And if you don't know that, somehow it comes up as a requirement. It only disappears once you see the system. And if you see the system late, it disappears late, and it's just creating additional effort. And that's why I believe this knowledge gap at the beginning, so where the consultant doesn't know the customer and the customer doesn't know the target system, if you close that knowledge gap with a practical approach, working with a system, hands-on, can reduce that complexity and this knowledge deficit what both parties have.
And I'm curious from the perspective you've seen, in particular, maybe Sammy, you could start out, and then Patrick, from the quality point of view, how do these things, if they get out of alignment or they start getting complex from the beginning, how does it really impact projects or derail them? What have you seen? How does it show up, and what's been the end result that happens at these customers? And maybe any examples that come to mind.
Sure. So a bunch of different ways, right? Bernd obviously talked a lot about that. Misalignments will absolutely lead to project delays. That's very, very common, but it'll also lead to a lot of frustration. So you could have the best talent on your project, but if they're not aligned to what the business wants, they're just going to get frustrated, and you're not, they're just going to leave. And replacing that is another challenge, right? Adoption. How are you even thinking about adoption? One of the challenges I've seen on large transformation projects is change management and adoption. And that's one piece that just gets chucked out saying, oh, we don't even need that. But no, you absolutely do. And you need that from day one. I mean, you don't wait until the system's ready, just to Bernd's point and to Patrick's point, right? You kind of start to looking at the adoption piece from the day you start a transformation project. And I think that's kind of what I've seen.
Yeah, and to kind of piggyback on that with regards to the quality part, quality, if it comes late, will not be good quality. Yeah, so if you don't start with a quality mindset from the very get-go, and you pretty much define what you are setting to be the standard for quality, it's very, very hard to reach that. So what we see is that people, of course, talk about the risk exposure as you implement a new system or change a process, whatever. But then it typically, unless there is already a way of taking action right away at the company and a mindset to do this, it's kind of kept on the back burner. People know, oh, we'll eventually have to test, and then, the project runs into the typical problems, and all of a sudden we have less time, and the people who actually are able to test, are busy doing other things, right? So testers are not technical people. Testers are people who know, what is my business, doing, and what do we need to watch out for? And those need to be considerations about, let's think about scenarios that are meaningful, not just, okay, customer number 1000, material number 4711, no, that's not testing. Testing is what is happening in the geos that have the most exposure from a perspective of, commercial impact, combined with maybe some other factors that are not under my control. Am I ready, to address what might be happening there, right? What is happening in my supply chain, et cetera, right? So point being, if the quality objective, right, is not clearly articulated, linked to the business objective of transformation, and is then handed over to the team for execution, you're going to end up with busy work that's not going to lead to the expected result, and then you might actually do a lot of busy work and still miss what you should have been looking at. There is a big difference between running 1,000 tests and running 10 ones that really mean something.
And what do you find, Patrick, then, in terms of if they're not building in or doing that proper testing? How does it sort of manifest itself in the project? Is this, we talked about delays, but is there other things that happen?
Yeah, I mean that you have business exposure, right? All of a sudden you have a situation where you end up with the truck not leaving, the company grounds, right? Because lo and behold, we forgot to, anticipate that there might be certain combinations that happen with customer X as we have a demand coming from whatever city Y, right, that we cater to. So the impact of not doing this is a direct business impact. Right? I mean, it can also be technical. You can have problems that need to be addressed at the technical level, but the bigger element is really the risk exposure from the information that the business requires to take action in the physical world, so to speak, is not coming, and then the impact being a monetary one, hopefully not one that threatens lives. I mean, ERP, again, depending on the customer, might do things that go into really, really harmful realms, right? And so that's really what we're talking about, that is the exposure, and that is the bad impact. The project delay is one thing we keep talking about. But at the end of the day, it is the business impact that is what really keeps us all up at night.
Yeah, that's interesting. Sort of after the go live, and that has a bigger impact. It's the unknowns that you don't have that then hit your business and could stop or shut it down. Where you hear some of these horror stories afterwards as part of that. And I was just picking up on that because I know, Barrett, you had talked about examples of some customers, two of the same type of business, one that is successful, one that isn't. Is there any examples just from your past that you thought maybe highlight on that point that maybe you could should us share that maybe without maybe we'll save the names so we don't call out those that really had the challenges, but I suspect that you've had that, seen A and B and why A is successful and B is not.
So, I mean, a very famous example is in Germany with two big discounters. Huge projects, large enterprise. I would say I'm not a discounter expert, but from my perspective, these companies are definitely comparable. And one was very successful, went live with a global practice, and the other one failed. Might restart the whole initiative. But this was one example. And another example that came into my mind from a different perspective, in the early days, I remember that a big German car manufacturer was doing a large project with 500 plus people, consultants. And they really came into such a situation, what Patrick mentioned, they were not able to deliver spare parts anymore. They had to go to the showrooms to take the spare parts and ship it to their dealers. And at the end, a team of maybe 10, 15 people fixed the problem. And then you can see, 500 people created a problem, what 10 or 15 had to fix afterwards. And that's maybe a second element to that very often we try to solve problems with more people. And we say, we have to increase the project team, we have to add more headcount. But then it makes it more complex, right? You need the right people, you need the right skills. And then I think you can also manage the complexity and be successful at the end. So these are the two things that came into my mind when you asked.
Yeah, it's interesting when you mention that. I remember a famous story of the CEO of Computer Associates in the early days where if he had a project that was off track, he would cut the team in half because it was often from having too many people. But I'm wondering if I pick up on that, I've also seen that from what we talked about earlier, there was back in the 90s, people would do this almost like single-handedly with a smaller set of tools. Nowadays, we've got all sorts of tools. But I'm wondering, is this tool sprawl really making ERP more complex? So maybe, I know, Patrick, you're in the tools part, but I'd love to hear from Sana from, what she's seen on the projects. Is this tool sprawl really making them more complex?
So I think, Ross, the tools are, developed and are meant to make your life more easy. Absolutely. And I think given the right tools, with the right landscape and your clients will absolutely make business much, much more easy to implement an ERP. The complexity comes in when people don't understand the depth and the breadth of what those tools can do. And that's where the challenges begin. So if when you do take a step back and through a planning phase, through phase 0, you decide what tools you are going to use in your environment, that'll give you a better handle as opposed to getting tools while you're already in flight, right? That just creates more complexity. But I think overall, tools are definitely the way to go.
And so what's your perspective? I know you probably are biased to say, on the tool sprawl thing, but any thought process, Patrick, from...
Yeah, well, thank you, Sana. So that was a paid ad, of course. Yeah, but actually, I will actually be devil's advocate. I work for a product company, and we're very, very excited to be part of this so-called tool chain that has been mentioned a couple of times, which is a term that has been around for many, many years in effect. So we go back, they were just other tools and so forth. What has really happened is that the secret sauce is not the tool, it is the methodology. Yeah, and that is where what you showed before, that mammoth project plan, all of a sudden becomes tasks that are given via a connected set of tools to their stakeholders. Yeah? Now we're talking, because now there is a type of glue, that works through the tools to actually make sure that, for instance, as we have these strategic conversations around business capabilities and risk exposure, at the stage where we're far before any implementation project. So enterprise architects, speaking with business stakeholders and CIOs and making basically plans for what shall be done. We can capture stuff there that, lo and behold, no longer gets lost and gets rediscussed like it never happened, but all of a sudden, boom, it bubbles up as part of the scope, of our implementation. So we bring enterprise architecture into application lifecycle management. Huge step forward. I mean, when we started talking enterprise architecture at SAP, for those who had participation in that, you remember it was TOGAF at the time, the Open Group Architecture Framework, which was a secret science. You had to learn a foreign language in order to even participate in the conversation. So nothing came out of there that was immediately actionable for the normal project manager. It was like, okay, these people are doing some, dreaming up the future world and designing the better architecture and whatnot. But okay, what's in my scope here? What feature would you need to switch on and so forth? And although there were connections, they were so difficult to see, because they lived in a different, space of information. It would never flow to me. So now, this flows. But again, it is thanks to the fact that we have been doing Activate for so many years, and thanks to the fact that we're working together, bless you, between enterprise architects and project managers and process people for a while now, to say, hey, we should actually make sure this, travels over here, this travels over here. And this is where SAP has really taken an interesting lead, I would say, because they have taken this whole story about we give you guidance on how to implement projects to the level of we give you guidance on how we connect strategic conversations with tactical conversations, right? And so that's why, with us now being at the tail end of the whole story, at least for the implementation, because quality comes at the end, we are now there basically catching the balls that the people from process and the people from enterprise architecture throw at us, right? So we have a process that becomes scope, but it becomes at the same time what you want to test against, although the process, of course, is more coarse granular than the test, but you have a point of reference that is very directly related to what the business talked about, right? And all of a sudden you can write tests that really match up with the expectations without having to do phone calls or, go and search stakeholders and something like this. So long story short, the tools fed correctly, back to the point about methodology, that is where it starts to really get interesting, right? And we are at the beginning of that, because this is now something that is kind of more visionary. It's being brought into the market. People like this. There's a lot of interest in this conversation, but we're not at the point of practitioners being able to say, okay, pay attention as you build your process model to do exactly this here with, testing in mind, or as you have this enterprise architecture discussion, with regards to discussion to the impact on the data integrity level, as you have a BDC deployment, yada yada yada. This is potentially there now. We now get to need to get the people who are in these conversations further enabled, and then actually starting to use it, and then we will see this. Last comment, because I'm quite fascinated by this. SAP eat their own dog food in this regard, because they're now using NIX as part of the specification of what is in the bill of material, which is really very interesting, right? It's like, okay, produce something that if the customer finally signs this, now boom, it can be brought into execution right away. And that is years away of value engineering, coming up with PowerPoints that look absolutely fancy, but you would never see ever again. And the implementation consultant shows up day one and is like, okay, anybody has requirements for me? Let me put this into the Word document.
That's very interesting. And I want to pick up on a couple of things that you mentioned there that stood out. One was you mentioned methodology, and then you mentioned about project managers. And, as I think about it, it sounds like the tool chain, it's kind of in its early stages. It's, it's still going to require something about methodology, but I wonder, what's like a great ERP project manager? Because if you can get a really great one on their project, they can really help solve these problems of complexity and control. And I'm wondering, maybe Bernd, from your experience of, running this and seeing the best project managers, and what do you find they would really do to really reduce and solve this complexity and control?
Yeah, I really think the tool chain is a game changer, and the project manager has to orchestrate and advise the client how to use it properly, because all the different elements of the tool chains come from different providers. Yeah, some are within SAP, but also different units within SAP. Some come from third parties, but you have to orchestrate everything. So it's not one experience. And I think there's a big potential in making that more interoperable and more seamless. And I think a good project manager can help the client to set that up and also decide, okay, what tools are important for you, what tools are not so important for you. And I think we are really making big steps forward. From my perspective, if you have a strong tool chain set up, if you have the corresponding methodology with that, I believe the efforts of the implementation projects will go down significantly. I believe doing that well, you can be already 25-30% more efficient compared to a traditional approach, what you showed before in your Activate slide with all the individual activities. So I think if you do it smart, you can be far more efficient. And what would a good project manager do? I believe a good project manager who has seen many projects will have a very practical approach, right? So he will make sure that you see the system very early, that you see what you get, that the customer can somehow visualize how his organization will look like in the target system early, that they can really participate in the design discussion early. And I think the tooling what we have right now can empower the project manager to do that. So doing everything what we call is front loading, providing the tools, providing the system very early in the process, giving the customer confidence that everything is supported that he's requiring, or showing him a way how it's solved. And then there's an element that's really fascinating right now. I mean, Patrick, you mentioned that it's just the beginning. I think if you combine all these tools in the tool chain, and if you combine it also with the current AI capabilities that come up, I think they're fantastic possibilities, right? So working with a process model where the system is directly connected. If you make changes to the process, immediately update your test cases and execute the test cases. Imagine how much effort this is in an implementation project if you do that manually, even with test automation tools, but if you do it in an integrated way. And I believe step by step, we will add AI agents, services to the tool chain and to the project environments that will reduce the effort that you need for implementation projects. And I think it's just the beginning. Even within LeapGreat, I think every week we make so much progress with new features that are coming up, with new capabilities that are coming up. And at the end, I think we really come closer to this vision of a more industrialized and a more automated implementation project with less risk and faster implementation times.
Well, that's great. I'm going to turn it over to Sana to continue on as part of this, but I wanted to make sure from the audience that please add in any questions and comments, because otherwise I'll keep rolling along here as I want to drill down on this on your behalf. But I'd love to hear your questions, and just feel free to post them in the comments, and we'll make sure that the panel can address that. But I was wondering, turning it back to yourself, Sana, because you're involved often in the early stage of the projects. Bernd brought up this idea for great project managers, they find ways to do certain things early, such as seeing the working system so the business can do that. And also I picked up on this idea of connecting, like it's not only connecting the tool chain, but connecting things, which I guess is things like process to your system so they can see it. But can you maybe expand on that from your own experience of, what great project managers do, so that, because that's maybe instructive of how people can set up their own projects, to solve this complexity and control issues that we've been talking about.
Sure, absolutely, Ross. I think it comes down to planning, right? Bernd mentioned very rightly that there is many project managers who are really good at, imagine if they're given the access to these tools, add the AI capabilities to it, it can be humongous. The output could be absolutely amazing. And I think it goes back to your phase 0 or your planning phase. So if you spend time at least 3 to 6 months before you are going to kick off a project, a phase 0, that is definitely going to give you enough ammunition to understand what your project is going to look like, as opposed to just hurtling right in and saying, oops, we didn't even think about this, right? So the best projects that I've been on and I've seen are those projects where there is strategic alignment, there is a phase 0 or a planning phase done. The people are excited to do what they're doing, and everyone knows how they are going to move from one phase to the next, right? And what Ross we offer in terms of the whole phase 0 and the version 0, they're also able to see the system even before they get started. So I think that's tremendous value on how we are going to conduct ERP projects. Very, very different than how they were done in the past.
So does that really play up by seeing that as you do your planning, and if you can see the system, does that really somewhat mitigate a lot of the complexity, because you don't have these work streams, which I guess if you don't have something that anchors them, the work streams can go off in their own direction.
Correct. Absolutely.
And I was wondering, to that end, Patrick, is that part of the challenge that you see? Because often people think of like testing as, oh, we'll deal with that later. And how do we bring that up? Things like test and building quality. Is that what you're?
Totally. I mean, I alluded to it before, right? Where I said you have to have it at the very beginning. We have this term called the test intent. And that is basically a statement around what risk, are you trying to mitigate? From a business perspective, for instance, the choice of a certain scenario that typically uses some reference to data to say, okay, this is something that we want to really make sure works absolutely. So think of, for instance, dangerous goods that are being transported, and you want to have certainty that going through a certain transportation route with certain goods, in for instance, certain types of vehicles, let me create that scenario, right? We have absolute certainty that this will be, hunky-dory, whatever, right? Now, if you have the ability to tie that, for instance, to processes, and it wouldn't be reasonable to tie all of that to processes. So I'm not saying, unload all your business roles into Signavio. That's not what I'm saying. But if you can say, okay, here we have the delivery, the fulfillment process, for instance, and as we model the fulfillment process, we make an annotation there to say, as the transportation happens, consider combinations of material types and containers, and risk classification. Simply the statement that such combinations can play a role, right? You don't specify, product 13509 and then route whatever, but you simply say, okay, these are the type of combinations, right? Then this can now be used downstream. Bernhard was optimistic about AI, and I'm also a friend of using the systems to do things for us. But what it boils down to is, if you have information that can be interpreted, then you can really effectively reduce the manual work, right? And so if you have the process owner having those meaningful conversations with the business owner, which are the people who ultimately need to make those judgment calls, and park it, in the process model. Now, as we go to testing can, and we're talking future state here, but not too far future state, we can extract this information, say, okay, these are the things that should be looked at. Dear, people who are now looking at the specific records in the system, give me those combinations, and off we go and have a very, very specific test written, for these combinations. And this is super tight, to the conversation that happened maybe months before with the business owner, and the process owner was sort of the vehicle here, right? That's this type of tying things together, and this, leveraging the channel of the tool chain, right, to making a communication happen that really brings things that can completely fly apart all of a sudden, being connected.
Well, that's very interesting, and we popped up a question that came up from one of our viewers here, and I think this is kind of playing off what Bernd said. And I'm not sure, this is getting into a little bit the technical side of whether SAP supports customizing with standard business process catalog comparable to. I'm not personally familiar with BPC on DevOps, but I don't know if any of the panel has any perspective or could comment on this question, or if this is one would have to do a bit of a follow-up on with somebody more technical.
I mean, I would argue LeapGreat does that, right? I mean, you
Yeah.
choose, isn't it? Right? I mean, you present the customer a list, not of customization settings, but of processes, and then exactly what happens then is that the technical settings and all the things go from there. Now, SAP has over the years also seen that it needs to be a little bit more systematic. The business processes in the so-called best practices are a little bit, how should I say? It's like going to the flea market. Yeah, you'll find all sorts of things, but it's not really a structured shop where you go in. Okay, here we have the whole supply chain, and then we go into networks, and now we go into these scenarios. So they built something called the reference business and solution architecture, which is highly systematic and goes from these are standardized end-to-end processes into industry variants into solution processes. So content will shift more in this direction, and the ambition again is then from there have configuration content that matches, driving the conversation further.
That's great. Thank you, Patrick. I don't know if there's anything we want to add on that point, but I did want to drill down and see in the time that we have sort of remaining. Is there any other practical things that you think a customer can do to get back in control, in addition to the things that we've talked about, of doing certain things easy, aligned to the business, and connect to your system? Is there any other practical things that you've seen customers do to take back control? I don't know if any other examples from your background, either Barrett or maybe I'll start there and see if anybody has any practical things they can leave the audience with.
I think it's all about knowledge. So the customer has to build up some knowledge, and they should not outsource somehow responsibility for the project to their system integrator. I think that's key. I mean, that's the prerequisites to take control of your project, that that you are able to make key decisions, that you can take quality decisions with the right knowledge. I think that's most important. Building up these own capabilities, and also building up capabilities within your organization. I mean, right now, customers move either to the public cloud or to the private cloud. You need to prepare your organization to operate such an environment. You need to see what is coming from SAP, what SAP provides with the RISE or with the GROW offering, and what is missing, what do you have to build on your own, where do you need your service provider. So I think taking responsibility, being an essential or an integrated part to operate your target system, having that capability brings you back in charge. So it's all about knowledge.
Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting point you make about the systems integrators, because often in conversations I'll have is some will say, hey, I want to take back control, and others are like, I just want to give it to them. I want to write it all up and then have one throat to choke as part of that, and they're just hoping that the systems integrator, that magic will happen around that, because they figure maybe they've figured it out because they've done it for a lot of other folks before. But I'm wondering other perspectives from Patrick or Sana that you can share of just pragmatic things that people can do to get take back control.
Yeah, I think a lot also to Bernd's point. I think it also upskilling teams. So it's fantastic to have the ambition of running an ERP project and making sure you can deliver, on time, on budget. But I think a lot of people don't take a very pragmatic view on what they have. A lot of clients don't see what kind of teams they have. And sometimes those teams need upskilling. Those teams need to be brought forward and, into the newer ways of thinking, right? We talked about tools, we talked about tool chains, AI, so many different components, and things have really changed in the last 2 or 3 years. With RISE coming on from 2021, things have really changed how SAP actually does these projects, or how these ERP projects are conducted. So I definitely think there is opportunity to get these internal teams, upskilled even before they get into an ERP project. I think I've seen that a lot.
And in that upskilling, I guess I'm wondering, have the companies really adapted the way that they're doing these projects? Are they still doing them the old way? Is that part of the the challenge that we're facing.
Yeah,
So it's
they're
still
still
not just on
doing it the old way. Yeah.
and
Maybe Ross,
so
just one aspect maybe
yeah.
To that. I think one capability, it's easy to say you have to work with the standard or you have to implement the standard, but to enforce the standard and talk to your business users and convince them, it's better to go with the standard process that's embedded in the system.
Correct.
Versus changing it or maybe just transferring your old process. And these are capabilities, these are facilitation capabilities that you need within your team. You need to be able to talk to your business and convince them and challenge them also on the business processes. If you don't have that capability, business will drive you maybe in the wrong direction and will increase complexity.
Yeah.
So I think that's definitely something that is key, to have that type of skill in your project team and have the right mindset, to prove that standard works for you, and maybe revert if standard doesn't work for you. You have to explain why.
Why?
So you need good arguments why the standard doesn't work for you.
So one of the practical things that they could do is actually, if they can show the standard, they have to have like an executive review committee that they have to go to get approval. So they have to almost build a business case of why they can't use standard is a practical thing to do. Otherwise they'll, it's too easy.
Veer off the budget, right, and so forth. I think at a level of governance, yes, that makes sense. But I think it starts at a show me level, right? I think knowledge, yes, I think this is the key thing, and enablement is necessary in order to have up-to-date knowledge. And I think the point then becomes, okay, can we convince the stakeholders that are involved in the decision-making process, or the people who are representing the business and are involved as key users, power users, what have you? There it is, show me, and not just argue it on sort of abstract grounds, but okay, here is what this looks like, and here is maybe things that you haven't been thinking about in the past. We have an analytical view, that all of a sudden shows the information, and unless you do it this way, it will not show up, right? So showing implications of not doing it, but in a very pragmatic way. Yeah? And I would add then, once that convincing or the delivery, right, in a show me way happens, you need to capture the decisions, right, in the tool chain so that it can be consumed, right? So I think the point with knowing what you're doing and taking ownership takes on a completely different level once you systematically capture this, and then you basically just need to sign off and it gets executed, right? It is not something that remains in isolated discussions and documentation that is sort of just created during these discussions. But if it becomes actionable information, that is pushed to the execution phase, that I think has some very, very big potential. And at Sapphire, Thomas Sauer-Essig presented the integrated tool chain, basically with the overarching promise that it would accelerate transformation and bring down the cost. And he, said numbers that were along the lines of what Bernhard referenced before, in the 30-40% range. I think this is totally viable, because if you remove the translation and the rework from the projects that we have through flowing information that basically just gets augmented and gets becomes actionable, I think this is not overstating it, quite the opposite. I think we will maybe even see more.
That's excellent. I know we're heading to the top of the hour, so I'm probably going to say we want to wrap up. I think as well, it wasn't as much a question, but from Jordy, one of our participants, that talked about how it's all about the knowledge. And I found it very interesting. His comment was that often the customer has no clue what and how their system is set up. And I'm wondering if that fits into this narrative, where often they're just sort of saying, oh, I'll just let the systems integrator take it. And they're not, building up their own capability, their own control, maybe even what some people are trying to do, which is a center of expertise that has that. So I didn't know if there was any sort of final comments before I, take a minute just to do a little wrap up and talk about where we take this conversation, because I suspect that, there's probably a series of additional ones that we'd like to do, around this, to drill down on specific topics that we've kind of just, cut the surface of right now. So I don't know if from our panelists, if there's other things you'd like to just make a final, 30-second summary that would be worthwhile, or before I wrap up.
Sure, Ross. I just would like to add, before you start off on an ERP transformation, it is absolutely possible to get a phenomenal experience. Just spend the time planning it and ensuring that you have all the, boxes checked. That's all from me.
And from yourself, Barrett, anything on the, that final advice of how they can reduce complexity here?
I think Sana's words were perfect, so I agree with Sana.
Exactly.
Thank you.
Okay, and
I
Patrick?
will just say, don't forget the human expertise. We talked about the tools, we talked about the standardization and so forth. Information is just a reflection of what is inside ourselves, and that is more than information. It's knowledge, it's experience, right? It's also things that go more in the interpersonal realm, and in the end, transformation is a team sport. Yeah, so I think looking at those dimensions that go beyond what can be purely formalized shouldn't be left out of the equation. Yeah, it maybe starts to play at a different level if we leverage all these things we talked about for more industrialized execution. But don't forget the humans. They're the ones who know.
No, that's great. I want to summarize to say I think what I heard today was projects are more complex than ever, compared to where they were maybe back in the 90s when people might have been able to do them all. But, it also is somewhat, the organization, because it seems like there's multiple work streams. They're kind of siloed. We also have many tools and decisions that need to be made, such as even private versus public. But if we can bring these things together, as some of the best project managers would do, you should be able to accelerate your projects and be more in control, and it's probably incumbent upon those people to think about they need to take that control. You can't just assume that your systems integrator is going to magically be able to wave the wand here, and in fact they may be used to doing things in a certain traditional way, and it may be hard for them to change because often these firms have their own governance of what they do too, because they're trying to reduce their risk when they take on these projects, because they don't want lawsuits or whatever else that seems to come up if things don't go well. But I would say, based on the discussion today, I think there's a number of drill downs that we should consider, and I'll throw it to the panel that I may see if we can do some follow-on ones in the coming months, because specifically around, for example, there's probably a whole topic around how to make the right decision, public versus private cloud. The second is, this idea of process, and it's, how it fits throughout these different complex work streams. And in particular, I'd love to drill down on the data aspects, and I know that that's a key thing in the SAP world. Drilling down on the whole, doing things late, such as testing that causes rework. And one thing we only just glanced upon, but I think this whole topic of change management that sort of came up a little bit would be worthwhile. So I'm going to sort of suggest to our folks that we'll try and do a series of follow-on ones so for those that are listening in and have reached the end here, think of this as just the start to probably a more deeper conversation on specific topics. And I want to thank our panelists today for sharing all their insights and helping to really get this conversation going around complexity, and not trying to just say, oh no, this is easy, we can new tools will make it all easy, all the kind of sales pitch, but recognize these are hard, complex projects, but helping to say there's pragmatic ways that we can help companies get back in control as part of it. So I thank everybody for joining today, and we look forward to seeing everybody on our next series as we drill down further.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Have a great day.